often people have accused you of generalizing.
Yeah.
So I want to give some statistics of Britain, because we're obviously in London. And I think the stats themselves in survey after survey speak to this truth, which is why my own thinking evolved. When we first met, I was arguing Islam is a religion of peace. I now advocate very openly that it's either neither a religion of peace or war, or both, meaning because it's interpreted in many ways, and so how we judge it today is by how Muslims respond to their scripture today. So some stats, and this is in multiple surveys, we've gauged opinion, not me, but polling companies have gauged opinion of British Muslims. And this is the reason I'm so concerned and why we do what we do. 0% of British Muslims have expressed any sympathy to homosexuality. A third, when polled in a different survey, expressed sympathy to the Charlie Hebdo killings. A third also expressed sympathy for the notion of resurrecting a caliphate. And when we talk about these numbers, give or take a few 0.01% margin of error, 0% expressing no toleration for homosexuality is a serious concern when we have ISIS throwing gays off the top of buildings. A third expressing the notion of romanticizing the resurrection of a caliphate. It should be concerning to us. And even if people often, I mentioned this stat once I was at Aspen, and I mentioned this, and I had somebody on the panel with me who was a Muslim, practicing religious headscarf wearing Muslim woman. And she said, oh, but that's not ISIS caliphate. And I said to her, look, a caliphate is a theocracy, right?
Yeah.
So if you've got a third of the population in America express sympathy for the return of the Crusades, but it's concerning whether it's the ISIS caliphate or not. Any notion of the resurrection of a theocracy in the modern day and age cannot be good for civilization. So when you speak in these terms, I think often people worry that you're generalizing, but actually I'd argue that currently, and the snapshot of time that we can survey at the moment, the statistics demonstrate a worrying trend, a very worrying trend. And what I've often said is that whereas Islamism, that I would define as the desire to impose a version of Islam over society, theocracy, Islamism needs to be intellectually terminated. Islam today, as the religion, requires reform. And so we're dealing with a twin challenge. I don't know if you'd agree, but I think from your last book, it indicates to me that you would. Mm-hmm. We're dealing with a twin challenge of the absolute necessity to completely, totally, civilizationally destroy Islamism, the ideology, and that's the desire to impose a version of Islam on society. But on top of that, the vast majority of Muslims who may not be Islamists, still the understanding of Islam they have, as demonstrated by statistics and polls and surveys, isn't where I'm comfortable with. And that's because, for whatever reason, that reform process, we may be going through it, but it hasn't completed.
Am I the reason you get stoned every week now? Build up integrity, got you texting, emailing me, wanting me to feel with you. Baby, just face reality, move on. Sometimes it's hard to face reality.